This happened to me in 2018. The world wasn't locked down yet, but my life felt like it was. I had made a mistake, a big one. It cost people money, a lot of money. The fallout destroyed my reputation. People despised me. I had to change apartments, get a new number, even quit my job. It didn't stop the harassment. For months, unknown numbers flooded my phone with messages, threats, insults, warnings. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I thought I was free. I decided to take some time for myself, so I packed up and went camping. Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. A remote creek deep in the forest, miles from the nearest person. It was exactly the kind of solitude I needed. The hike was cold, the snow crunching beneath my boots, no signs of life. Just me, the towering trees, and the sound of the creek still flowing despite the winter chill. I found a spot off the trail, set up my tent, built a fire, and cooked dinner. The silence of the forest was strangely peaceful. I should have cherished it. I was sitting by the fire, smoking, letting the warmth soak into my bones when my phone vibrated. A text, unknown number. My stomach twisted as I read it. "How's the camping trip, buddy?" I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Another text came through. "It's beautiful out here." And then the last one. "I see why you came up here." I shot to my feet, my head spinning. My high evaporated in an instant. My first thought was a family member messing with me. But no, this was different. This wasn't playful. This was something else. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the dark trees beyond the fire's glow. Silence. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I grabbed my .65 handgun from my bag, my pulse pounding in my ears. The fire crackled, the only sound in the dead forest. I texted back, "Who is this?" No response. I sat inside my tent, my headlamp casting eerie shadows on the fabric. I tried reading, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to those texts. I put on a YouTube video, some true crime documentary, to drown out the silence. Then another text. "Doesn't matter anymore." A chill ran through me. My hand tightened around the gun. I typed back, "How do you know I'm camping?" Nothing. No answer. Just silence. Then a sound. Crunch. Footsteps. Not animal. Not the wind. Human. The slow, deliberate crunch of snow beneath boots. Coming closer, closer, stopping. Right outside my tent. I held my breath, my finger hovering over the safety of my gun. The silence stretched, unbearable. Then a flash, a split second of light illuminating the tent from outside. A picture. Whoever was out there had taken a photo of my tent. My phone vibrated. My stomach dropped as I opened the message. It was the photo. My tent, framed by the darkness. Then another text. "Sleep well." Something inside me snapped. I unzipped the tent, heart pounding, and fired 2 shots into the air. The gunshots shattered the silence, echoing through the trees. The crunching of footsteps, running now, retreating. But they had been close, watching, waiting. I stood there, breathless, scanning the darkness. I was being watched even now. I felt it. My voice broke the silence as I screamed into the night. "If you come back, I won't miss." Silence. Then nothing. I didn't sleep. I sat there, gripping the gun, staring at my phone, waiting. No more texts, no more footsteps. The fire burned out, leaving me in total darkness. When the sun finally rose, I packed up and left without looking back. That was nearly 7 years ago. I never got another text, never heard from them again. But I think about that night often, because somewhere out there someone knows what I did. Someone knows where I was. Someone watched me just beyond the firelight. and I don't think they ever really left. In the summer of 2015, when I was just a middle schooler, my parents enrolled me in a month-long, all-boys summer camp nestled deep within the woods, 4 hours away from our town. The camp, isolated and forgotten, consisted of a handful of crumbling cabins scattered throughout a dense, oppressive forest, a murky lake that seemed to devour the very light around it, and several fire pits that looked like they'd witnessed countless unspeakable tales. There was even a sand volleyball court, though it looked abandoned, with thick weeds strangling the once pristine sand. Upon arrival, I settled into one of the decaying cabins. The floorboards creaked and groaned under my weight as though they were protesting my presence. Some of the boys, brave or foolish, I couldn't tell, suggested we explore the woods before dinner. The camp's rules were strangely relaxed. We could wander as far as we liked, as long as the cabins remained within sight. As we ventured deeper into the eerie, shadow-filled woods, one of the boys noticed something, or rather someone, watching us from between the trees. A man, older, probably in his 50s, stood still at the edge of the forest, staring directly at us. His disheveled gray hair hung like dead weeds over his face, and his matted beard was thick with dirt. His clothes, filthy, tattered rags, clung to him like a second skin. He gave us a chilling, twisted smile that revealed yellowed, decayed teeth, and I froze. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I instinctively took a step back. Without a word, we ran back to our cabin, the air growing heavier with dread as we looked over our shoulders. That night, shaken and on edge, we told a counselor about the strange encounter. He seemed genuinely alarmed and hurried off to search the woods, but the man had vanished into thin air. The staff, mostly young, inexperienced teens, had no clue who he was. The days that followed were fraught with a deep, unshakable tension. We stayed close to the cabin, the man's sinister grin haunting our every thought. Then, on the fourth night, as I lay in my bunk, sleep eluded me. A sharp, unnerving rattle shook the cabin door. I bolted upright, eyes wide in the darkness. The usual 11 p.m. check-in by the counselor had long passed, and it was as if the night itself had grown colder, darker. Summoning all my courage, I whispered, "Who's there?" The response was immediate. A blinding beam of light pierced through the window, sweeping the room like a predator searching for prey. I motioned for the others to stay silent, holding my breath as the footsteps circled the cabin, the flashlight's beam slicing through the night and briefly illuminating our terrified faces. After what felt like an eternity, the light disappeared. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind of silence that presses in on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. We stayed awake, every one of us frozen in place, too terrified to sleep. When a counselor finally arrived the next morning to gather us for breakfast, we recounted the ordeal. His face drained of color as he listened. He told us that, earlier that night, another camper had gone to use the bathroom and had spotted a man trying to pick the lock of one of the cabins. The description was unmistakable. It matched the vagrant we'd seen earlier, filthy, unkempt, with a thick beard. The camp was immediately shut down, and we were sent home that afternoon, though none of us spoke a word on the long ride back. Years later, I learned the truly horrifying truth. After we left, police scoured the woods and discovered a makeshift tent hidden in a remote corner of the forest. Inside, they found basic supplies and, most chilling of all, hundreds of Polaroid photos. There were pictures of the camp, the cabins, the lake, the fire pits. But the most disturbing shots were of us, taken from the shadows when we thought we were alone. Some were taken through the windows of the cabins while we slept, our faces peaceful, unaware of the malevolent presence just outside, watching, waiting. The man was never caught, and the photographs, the twisted memories of that summer, remain a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk unnoticed, even in the places we think are safe. It was a cold, crisp evening in late October, 2023. I had always enjoyed camping in the woods behind my property. I live on a large plot of land, surrounded by dense forest, so I often take short trips into the woods to escape, to find peace. The campsite I set up is no more than a 15-minute walk from my house, a quiet, secluded spot where I can sit and lose myself in the sounds of the forest. There are no breathtaking views or serene lakes, just trees and the solitude of nature. But this night would be different. This night, something was waiting for me. The sky was already darkening as I set up my fire pit and unpacked my gear. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest cloaked in shadows. As I went about my task, I noticed something odd. A figure in the distance. Not far from my campsite, just about 100 yards out, a person was walking through the woods. Their pace was slow, methodical, as though they had all the time in the world. But I knew they didn't belong here. This was my land, and they were trespassing. I wasn't alarmed at first, just confused. They seemed to be walking away from my property, heading toward the neighboring land. The fact that they were so close, and yet unaware of my presence, made my skin crawl. Still, I shrugged it off. No reason to get worked up. I spent the next 3 hours alone in the woods. The only sounds, the crackle of my fire and the whisper of wind through the trees. The atmosphere was calm, almost peaceful. But as the hours passed, a strange unease crept in. The air grew colder, and the night became more oppressive, thick with fog. Around 9 p.m., I tossed another log onto the fire. As the flames flared up, lighting the campsite in flickering orange, I heard something that froze me in place. Footsteps. It was faint at first, but growing louder. Someone was running through the woods, sprinting, as if they were being chased or chasing something. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction. It was too dark to see anything, but I could hear the heavy pounding of feet against the forest floor. Whoever it was, they were moving fast. The footsteps raced past my campsite, heading deeper into the woods until they were swallowed by the night. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my chest. It was a person, I was certain of it. But why were they running through the woods in the pitch-black darkness of night? I should have packed up, should have left right then. But I didn't. Fear had settled in my bones, but I convinced myself I was safe. I stayed by the fire, staring into the glowing embers. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though. The air felt heavier now, oppressive. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if the very trees were holding their breath. By 10 p.m. I let the fire die down and retreated to my tent. I had barely fallen asleep when I was jolted awake. My heart nearly stopped in my chest. Footsteps again, closer this time. They were sprinting, coming straight toward my tent. I froze, listening. The steps stopped abruptly, right outside. Then I heard it. The sound of something scraping against the fabric of the tent. Something sharp. I barely had time to react before a knife slid across the material, slicing open the side of the tent. I could see a figure through the tear, eyes, cold, unblinking, staring directly at me. My heart raced as the panic surged through me. I leapt from my sleeping bag, bolted to the door of the tent, and burst out into the night, screaming at the top of my lungs. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care if they were following me. I just had to get out of the woods. The adrenaline pushed me faster and faster until I finally reached the safety of my house. I collapsed inside, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I dared not look out the window, but something made me. In the trees, just beyond the yard, there was a figure, standing still, watching me. I called the police immediately. Officers arrived, but by the time they came, the figure had vanished into the night. They searched the woods, but found nothing. No trace of the person who had been in my tent. No clue as to who they were. No explanation for the knife, the deliberate slashing of the tent. Days passed, but the unease didn't fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, that they had been watching me from the very start. And when the police returned to investigate the campsite, there was no sign of anything unusual. No footprints, no evidence of a struggle. Just an eerie, quiet forest. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened. They had followed me. They had found my house. They knew where I lived. For the next month, I hardly slept. The slightest sound sent me into a panic. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see that figure again, standing in the dark, just watching. It's been a year now. Nothing else has happened, but I still get the feeling. Sometimes when I'm alone in my house, when the wind picks up just right, I feel like I'm being watched, and I know that I'll never truly be safe. Because they're still out there, and they're waiting.